Hello and welcome to FUMC People, the show where I interview people here at First United Methodist Church of Gastonia. Today's episode features the Reverend Eddie Ingram, who is an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church. He has worked in local churches nearby, but he is also a psychotherapist. And you can see him. He has an office here at First United Methodist Church. And he's a great guy, and I really enjoy talking to him, and now you can all get to know him a little bit better. So I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I just kind of like have a conversation.
Oh, you gonna sit there?
Yeah, I'm sitting here, yeah.
Okay.
I just like have a conversation, so it's not like I don't ask you questions.
Okay.
I mean, I may,
All right.
but like,
All right. Go for it, man.
go for it.
Yeah. What do you want to know?
Well, let's do this. So where did you grow up?
I was born in High Point. My father worked for a Bluebell company, which manufactured lots of textile products, and so he was in the executive end, moved his way up. So we moved to Greensboro when I was in elementary school, and so I graduated from high school in Greensboro. So that's still home. My mother still lives there, as well as my brother. So
Okay.
but yeah, it's home for me.
And then what? And then you went to Appalachian. Did you go straight out of like high school to Appalachian?
I did. Graduated in '82 and then on to App for 4 years. Got my art degree, commercial art at the time. I was a graphic designer. And just a very formative time in my life because I was involved in the Wesley Foundation and campus ministry there, which was very profound in terms of just shaping my future.
Who was the campus minister there?
He was John Magnuson. He was had been there for a few years and had really done great work and had a really strong program. And he saw some seeds of ministry gifts in me and began to kind of encourage me to take leadership. So it was a good thing.
So were you really involved in the Methodist Church in high school then?
Yeah, well, I had been a Methodist my entire life. I was involved in middle school and high school in a ministry called Lay Witness Missions. It was a movement within the Methodist Church, very popular in the 70s and 80s, that had teams of lay people coming into churches and sharing about their faith in Christ and challenging people with making a commitment to Christ. And so it was one came to my church, a mission, and I really felt a closeness with God and made a decision for Christ to allow Him to lead me in my life, and began to go to these missions myself and share my faith story and lead youth groups and individuals in these weekends, and it was a really powerful experience for me on many levels. So yeah, saw a lot of lives changed through that program.
So then when you went to college, did you immediately go to the Wesley Foundation, or did someone invite you?
I was a scared freshman and had very few friends and didn't know what to do with myself. And so upon the encouragement of my youth minister in Greensboro, she wanted me to go try it out. And so I just went to open house, didn't know a soul, and started meeting people. It felt like home right away, so it was a good thing. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah. And it was in the same building, like on campus, right across from.
Well, yeah, the building at Appalachian is basically on campus, and it was a very convenient walking distance, and so that was how it began for me. And I eventually became president of the group and lived there in the upstairs apartment for a couple of years.
Nice, yeah. So
yeah, it was a good thing for me. So.
I've definitely known some people who have lived in that.
Yeah, you
upstairs.
Really? Yeah, I know you did. It was rent free for us back then. All we had to do was keep it clean, and
cool.
we didn't need. My mom and dad got a great bargain financially for me with my schooling because App was cheap, relatively speaking, and they didn't even have to pay for my housing the last 2 years.
Nice.
So it was a good deal for them and for me. So yeah, it was good.
Sorry, I freak out. I'm like, are we recording? I would hate to lose all this great information. Yeah. I mean, the Wesley Foundation's great. I mean, I was involved in 2 Wesley Foundations. Unfortunately, I didn't ever go to the Wesley Foundation at East Carolina University. actually, which
Oh, okay.
I sort of regret,
Right.
but
Yeah, Wesley for me, really, I grew up in college in so many ways. I was kind of an awkward high school kid, so college I began to kind of find myself a little bit. Worship teams, leading worship, and being a part of the music program there, and involved in the ministry on the college campus, trying to be a witness to Christ on campus at Appalachian, and just the bonding with Christian friends and the prayerful time experiences and the fellowship we had. All of that was really important to me, significant for my life. So.
well, and see, that's something that I didn't know about you, because I mean, well, obviously, usually when we hang out, I'm the one who's talking. Just kidding. but
Yeah, you're not alone.
right. But so Bill Faust, the drummer,
Yeah.
he played for you
He
guys
did.
this past Sunday
Yes.
at your church.
He did.
Which church do you attend?
First Methodist Belmont.
First
I actually
Methodist
sing in the
Belmont,
praise
okay.
team there, and we
Right.
were looking for drummers. So
That's cool.
I just happened to ask him. I said, "Would you like to come and try it out and see if occasionally, when you're not playing here, could you come be with us?" And so he said, "I'll check it out." So we'll see how it goes.
Well, and he's awesome. I mean, what do
Oh
you
my
think?
gosh!
Yeah.
We were like, we have a drummer. We have a really nice drum set,
Cool.
but he's awesome.
Yeah.
So we hope he'll come back sometime.
Cool. I'm sure he will. I'm
Yeah.
sure.
We
Yeah.
won't take him away from y'all, but we hope that he'll come back to see us sometime.
No, that's okay. You can borrow him. That's okay.
Yeah.
we'll let you.
It's good. It's good. So
I mean, of course, it's up to him.
yeah.
But what? So yeah, he was telling me that you're like you're a big leader. Like you're like out there singing and like really like
Yeah. It's kind of,
inviting the Holy Spirit into the situation. And like I didn't know that about you. I saw you as like a senior pastor and as a counselor, and like I didn't know.
well, what I
like-
call the cattle chute of the itineracy moved me into places where I was more of for 20 years I was in the local church, and then the further along you go, the more you become more in the administrative position, and some people do that really well, and that's their gift, but I felt like that as I went forward, I began to lose a little bit of connection with the things that I was drawn to the most, relationship building, and I'd never gone to school for this, but the worship and music aspects of my ministry, that was always an important part for me. So to be in a setting where I worship and I'm able to use my desire to be in music and the gifts that God has given me, it's been good. And I don't have to be in charge. I just go and help and lead where the senior pastor wants me to lead, and I don't have to take the fall for any problems that happen. So yeah, it's good.
So what do you mean? You said the cattle chute of ministry. Like, what do you mean by that?
Well, I went into when I was in seminary at Candler, I did art for a while and then sort of felt called to ministry. I decided to go to seminary for a year.
And that's Candler.
At School of Theology at Emory in Atlanta.
All right.
So I was out for a few years. There were some experiences I had. The death of my father, the death of the campus minister at Appalachian, both sudden deaths, two significant role models in my life, sort of led me to a place where I began to really consider what was next for me and where I needed to be, my purpose. And I went to Emory and Candler School of Theology, which is where I received my MDiv. And it was during that process when I was debating what to do with my ministry, I really felt like campus ministry, associate pastor, some sort of ministry where I was going to be involved more in relationship building and not necessarily the senior pastor of a church. But as it often happens, the system, for all the great things about the system, it doesn't really, in my opinion at least, it didn't have the place for me to explore and positions available for me to explore some of these things that I was most interested in. So I started out as an associate pastor and, was appointed to be a senior pastor, and then on, and 16, 17 years later, I was a senior pastor at First Methodist in Uptown Charlotte, and was resistant to that all along. Obviously, I would go where I'm sent, but I also felt that that I wanted to be more with people and less just doing the administrative stuff. And so I had been struggling with that for a number of years. And
So you said that you had a desire to be a campus minister. Were you ever able to serve as a campus minister?
No. However, I have the opportunity in the work I'm doing to work with youth in college age in counseling. At this moment, several of the kids that were high school kids last year when I was counseling them have moved off to college, and I still do FaceTime hours with them. So I'm able to do some therapy with college students. I would say probably on my bucket list, maybe, is one day to be able to work in a campus ministry or a campus setting doing therapy. Maybe perhaps on a staff at a mental health part of the college. So we'll see. But I do enjoy working with young people, 20-somethings, and I've just always found that. And I think part of that is because I was so formed in Wesley Foundation, and during those early years, I realized the importance of that nurture and structure. Sending people into the adult world prepared and feeling like they have it going on. So that's important to me. So yeah.
So you served as an associate pastor and then senior pastor, basically of various churches. Are those basically the two jobs the two hats you wore in ministry?
Yes, associate pastor for 3 years, then senior pastor of a couple churches, and one here in Gaston County, Bessemer City First Church was my first church.
Okay.
Which
As
is
a senior pastor.
It is. Yes.
Right.
And then
which Trip Horde is it's sort of a partnership where he's sort of on staff here and there.
Yes. They have a different relationship now. Back then it was a station church, and they were able to afford and had the ministries for me, so I was the only full-time person there. But then into Cleveland County, and then my wife and I were moved as a clergy couple to Macon County up in Highlands, a small resort community where we served for 5 years as co-pastors there.
Oh wow, you and your wife?
We did, yes.
Oh wow, okay.
And that was when, after those 5 years, great years, that she began to be in conversation with the bishop about coming to fill in as to take over what Denny White was doing at the conference office as a conference secretary and statistician. So that began to recruit her for Charlotte. And so when that kind of began to happen, he looked at me, Bishop McCleskey, and said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I think I want to do an associate pastor position. I don't really feel like I want to be a senior pastor. Came back a couple weeks later, and he said, I have a position for you at First Methodist Charlotte. I said, what staff position? He said, senior pastor. I'm like, okay. So I went, but I began to do this discernment that I really felt like I needed to make a change of direction. So after a few years of prayerful discernment, I decided to take a leave and go back to school, where I got my master's in social work.
And where was that?
At Winthrop.
Winthrop, okay.
Rock Hill. Yeah, they gave me in-state tuition down there for being in the Charlotte area. And,
oh, wow.
So 2 years later, I was licensed in clinical social work and began my work with Methodist Counseling Center, which is now Sanctuary Counseling. So, yeah, it's been a good thing. Like 6 years later, I'm still doing it. So, yeah, I think it's working out for me. I enjoy most days. I find it very rewarding. It's difficult work, but I have found it very life-giving for me. That I can see the impact of that type of work on lives. And so it's meant a lot to me to be a part of that and to be a part of this church, in partnership with this church.
Sure.
It's good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say like how difficult it is, but how satisfying it is. Because like a lot of times, as an adolescent and as a young adult myself, and I don't know if this was the case for you, but like a lot of times people present these dream jobs as the job where you can just chill out all day and get paid to do nothing, right? But then as you age, you start to realize that that's not actually the key to happiness.
Right. And I deeply believe that midlife, and I'm 53, that especially as we kind of get into our 40s, and I work with a lot of people talking about this, is that we build our persona which is what we think we're supposed to be, who we think we're supposed to be, what we want others to believe we are. And then we hit a place in our life where we say, maybe that fulfillment of that life is not as much as I thought it would be, and we go into a crisis where we have to reevaluate what we're doing and to make sure that what we're doing is in alignment with what we were made to do, what our purpose is. And for most people, I believe we go through a time of transition like that, where we have to realign ourselves. And so for me, that was sort of in line. I loved the ministry for the most part up until that time, but I felt like I was not quite in alignment with what my deep calling and purpose was, and I had put that off for quite a while, and I felt like I couldn't put it off any longer. So that was the reason why that I left the parish for the training that I got.
So you would say that it's very healthy to embrace that when that happens, like when you start to feel like maybe what you're doing didn't end up being, like, you think it's important to embrace that and not,
I think that we have no choice if we want contentment in our life, which is not the same as happiness. But the fact that that if we don't begin to integrate the parts of ourselves that we've kind of repressed or ignored for the first half of our life, which all of us do to some degree, that it will come back to show up in unhealthy ways. And so we need to be able to acknowledge what I call the shadow self, the part of ourself that perhaps we put away because we didn't think it was desirable. But we need to embrace that part of ourselves in order to be more integrated and whole people as we move into the second half of our adult life. So that's part of the work I do with a lot of people, is how do we integrate those two parts of ourselves. So it's important.
And it's not like you, as we said before, it's not like you chose something that was easy.
Oh yes.
So it's not necessarily going from something that's super stressful to something that's going to be easy. Like
the path of least resistance is rarely fulfilling. And then we begin to realize that really God calls us into difficult places that stretch us and that challenge us. And those are not easy places, but they're extremely rewarding. And I look at Mother Teresa's life. She was never happy about being called to where she was called. There were many times in her journals where she longed to be back to the comfort of her home. But she was also aware that the great fulfillment of her life purpose was, which gave her another type of satisfaction that was deeper than happiness, to be aligned with people in a ministry that was life-giving. And she couldn't do anything else. But it was not an easy life.
Sure.
And, people have a romanticized ideal, I think, about what life is supposed to be like, and we need to get over that quickly, because eventually life is about the hard stuff. And we realize that God gives us the strength to do the things that we never thought we could do otherwise. So, so that's part of that.
So you mentioned the journals of Mother Teresa. So how did you arrive at that as something to read? Do you recommend that? Is that a good...
Well, excerpts that I have read about her life, have been very profound for me.
Is there a certain book that you...
No, I actually have a devotional guide that often will include some of her journal excerpts.
Oh, okay.
She talks a lot about the dark night of the soul. I did spiritual direction certification a few years ago and explored the idea of what is the dark night of the soul. And she struggled with the idea that she didn't understand why that the closer she got to the needs of the people, she should have felt closer to God. Why was she feeling further away from God? And she began to really struggle with that. The more she aligned herself with the hurt of the world, the less she felt closer to God. And she really wrestled with that in her journals. And she came to the awareness that the reason why that she felt away from God was because she was aligning herself to the wounds of Christ and to the loneliness and the alienation Christ felt on the cross. So that as she became closer attuned to the wounds of the world, she also became aware of how Christ felt with his wounds on the cross. And so she actually was closer to Christ when she felt less close to Christ, if that makes sense. And so that gave her a renewed sense of purpose, realizing that it was not what she thought. She was actually closer to God than she ever had been. But she didn't judge that going forward based on how she felt, which is a significant thing. She had to go on the assurance of what faith says, the belief in things unseen,
Sure,
the presence of things hoped for. So,
well, what devotion guide is this?
Well, there's the daily guide for servants. Gosh, it's just a really basic. The name is failing me now.
No, it's okay. It's all right. I'm just, because like for me, I feel like so often in Christianity, like we put on this front, like, oh, I never doubt. I would never admit that I feel farther away from God ever. Right?
Yeah.
Do you feel this?
Yeah.
I mean,
yes.
not from mature people, not from spiritually mature people, but I definitely feel like there's this sort of like, so like the fact that someone who is arguably one of the most spiritually mature people of, the last 50 years or, whatever, is putting herself in a place of deep vulnerability there.
Yeah, and actually, one of the guides is the Emotionally Healthy Spirituality book. The author's failing me now, but he talks about the wall, or where we hit in our Christian life, where it doesn't add up. Unlike the prosperity gospel, which would say that if you are close to God, then you'll be blessed with riches and all these great feelings and wonderful things to happen. That for the true essence of the faith is that when we are being faithful to God, it'll be the opposite. That often we will feel the distance from, we will feel the nothingness of our life and the emptiness, which doesn't seem to add up for us. We want it to be like if we're, the blessings that will come if we are close to God. But we are close to God when we're feeling that emptiness. We're actually close to the cross, which is what Christ felt on the cross. And that gives me hope, because I sit with people who often feel the pain and suffering, nothingness, the emptiness, the deep, dark despairs of their life. And there are times I have felt that way.
Sure.
And so does that mean all is lost? Absolutely not. It's we are drawing closer to the cross of Jesus. And the emptiness he felt as he hung there, and being totally alone, but as close to God as he could ever be, and that, to me, that's truly the heart of the gospel message, and it does turn the health and wealth gospel up on its ear, that
Sure.
That we sometimes hear, what Christianity is about. It's just certainly has not been my experience of what faithfulness is.
So talk, if you don't mind, let's transition to another. So talk about the Enneagram for a little bit. How did you arrive at this tool of ministry and therapy and relationship building? Like, where was this something that you got into before or after you decided to be a counselor? Did you use this as a pastor? Talk about it.
Well, actually, the first time I learned about the Enneagram was when I was a pastor in a church, and Jody Seymour, a former pastor at First Methodist, he had written a book about the Enneagram, and I read it, and I am very much interested in personality theory and family systems theory and how that relates to spirituality. So I believe that one of the reasons why that I use that in therapy, and I really didn't use that in any significant way until I got on this side of this part of my ministry, is that it unlike some of the personality theories that are out there, which can be good, the Enneagram seems to be integrate the spiritual aspects of our life in a more holistic way. And it is, for me, it's a good way that I can integrate my own work as a clergy and also as a therapist. The Enneagram has been around, most people say over 2,000 years, and it's been used in secular and religious circles, not specifically Christian necessarily, but certainly by the early monastics, they used versions of the Enneagram.
Okay.
And I think I did some training on it, but I really think the reason why that I continue to use that most of the time with people is that I find that it is amazing how it helps people to come to some self-awareness about who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a window, I think, through which people can look backward at that point and see, oh yeah, I can see how that I have been acting in a certain way, or feel a certain way, or see myself a certain way, see others a certain way, and through that lens. And it's a real helpful learning tool for people to understand how they develop certain aspects of who they are, behavioral patterns, the way they feel about things. And I really believe that most of that formation comes during those early childhood years when we're in the incubator of our family. Mm-hmm. And we learn early in our life to survive. We have to be a certain person. And that's when that begins to really develop, the first 5 or 6 years of our life. And it carries with us throughout our whole life. Mm-hmm. So we can move and grow, and we do, but those default settings are in there from early on in our life, and they do shape the way that we see the world. And see our faith even. How do we understand God? How do we understand one another? How do we view politics in the world, or what's happening in the world? All of that, in my opinion, is deeply shaped by our personality.
Sure.
And so that kind of work is, I find, very rewarding. So, yeah. And I use it for staff trainings, and I go, I could hit the road with it, I guess. But anyways,
right.
Too much probably.
Yeah.
So,
well, so you said, so I've heard it described as an ancient Christian tool, but I guess you're saying that it wasn't necessarily.
Not specifically.
Yeah.
There's a lot of debate out there about where it came from, but I believe that there is certainly evidence that the early desert fathers and mothers during the early Christian years used elements of the Enneagram for discernment in their lives. And so I find it helpful because people who necessarily are not of the faith, mm-hmm. that still they understand themselves as spiritual beings, or even if they don't, the tool can be used for people who are in the faith and not of a faith tradition. So that so it kind of crosses over those boundaries, speaking some universal truths for people. So. It's good stuff. Yeah.
Are you keeping track of the time? I usually just let it go, but I want to be respectful of your time because I know
it's 9:36.
Okay, all right, 9:36. Sorry. So I usually just let it go until I'm like, okay, this is the end, but we have to be somewhere today. But so I don't want to necessarily just let that happen, because it could end up being 11, and then we're like, So
well, whatever you want to go with it, I'm good.
So how did you end up at here? How did you end up here at First United Methodist Church of Gastonia as the pastoral psychotherapist? Is that your title, pastoral psychotherapist?
Yes. Yeah, you got it. Yeah, it's interesting because I think that probably when I went into the degree program at Winthrop, I always thought that I would go back to the Methodist counseling circles because I wanted to integrate those two parts of my life. And I began dialogue with John Airy, who at the time was here 1 or 2 days a week, and his main office is in Charlotte. And he certainly was interested in pulling back to Charlotte because he's getting toward retirement now, and he was hoping to find someone to fill this role here and to spend more time in the Gastonia area. Shelton Davis is in Belmont, so we didn't have anyone serving the Gastonia area. So we just began that dialogue, and I think my second year I had a ad hoc kind of interview, get to know the other clinicians there, and just began to share my life story with them and what my goals were, and they felt like over that last year of my schooling that they thought this would be a good fit for me to be a part of it. I'm sure it doesn't hurt that my wife is, on the conference level, and we have a lot of ministries we provide for clergy candidates, psychological exams and things that we provide to help people along the way in their candidacy process. So that was a good fit for us. And because I know a lot of clergy, and I've been in this, what was the Gastonia district for a number of years, it's been a natural fit for me. And honestly, the people at this church have been just amazing, as far as just offering me space. I try to offer as much of my work to help with groups and things. Lisa Marissa Dea, in her work as a parish nurse, she's just been tremendous. We work together to try to do some things here. So it's just been a good fit for me.
So you provide services for the conference so you help out with the psych evals and stuff?
Well, actually, the Sanctuary Counseling Group, we do. There's a couple of people that
So not necessarily just you?
Well, not yet,
me,
in that John is trying, he's retiring in a couple of years, and he's trying to get me to take some extra certifications so I can take over his work with working with clergy candidates. The official candidacy process requires certain certification, which I can do. It's just a matter of me taking the time to a little bit more training.
Sure.
But I do work with clergy who are not in the candidacy program, but just for therapy and spiritual direction, which I offer both of those. So, yeah.
Which I guess, you're in a very unique position to be able to do that, being someone who's a counselor, but also you've been there.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why the clergy some clergy would seek out someone who kind of understands what it's like to be in that situation, and some of the perils of ministry and the struggles that we have. So yeah, and I certainly have had my share of challenges in the parish. So yeah, I try to offer that kind of support for them.
Yeah. So how did you guys end up in Belmont? Because you guys live there, right?
We do. We have a house. When I was at First Methodist Charlotte, we had a big parsonage down in the south part of town with a lot of doctors and lawyers. That was crazy. Not far from the bishop's house. But when I decided to take the leap out of the parish, we knew we'd have to go somewhere. So Belmont was a good place because we liked the school system there. Kim commutes to North Charlotte for her work.
Right.
And Winthrop was about a 30-minute drive from me, so it was a good, convenient location.
Sure.
We rented an apartment. We went from this beautiful house to a 2-bedroom apartment in Belmont where my daughter and son had to share a room. That was fun. We did that for about 6 months, and then we bought a little house there. So bought a house in a nice community, and that's where we stayed. So we really like that. And my son now is a senior at Stuart Kramer, and my daughter's a junior at Appalachian. So it's worked out. The further they get along and out of the house, the bigger the house feels, which is good. It's a small house, but it's perfect for us. So yeah, it's been good.
Sure.
Yeah. So that's how we ended up there.
Okay. Nice. So what would you say because I feel like sometimes, this sounds bad, when someone needs counseling and you recommend it, they don't want to go. I don't know if that's the best way to word it, but so let's say, it can be a tough leap for someone who's never been to any sort of mental health clinic or anything to just take that leap. And did you ever struggle with that? What do you say to someone who may be considering giving you a call, but they don't feel like they can, or they don't feel like they're ready?
Yeah.
And then maybe what are some of the reasons why people feel this way?
Right. Well, I think that there's a lot of stigma around mental health and wellness. Is that it's really easy for us if we have a broken leg. Obviously, we go to the doctor, the hospital, and have it fixed. But when we have a broken emotion, a broken heart, When we have something going on in our brain that's not allowing us to function, it's hidden. And so there's a lot of stigma around that. And so, but the mental and emotional health and wellness is just as important. In fact, they have often a significant impact on how our bodies are. So, so I think most of the time the reluctance is the stigma of what that might mean. However, I would also say that many people when they are really depressed or anxious or just even suicidal, they get to a place where they realize, I can't not do this, and so they get pushed to the point where it begins to impact their ability to function at times. Sleep disruption, diet, when they begin to just lose energy and desire for life. That's when often people will get pushed to that place. It would be wonderful if people would just say, "Oh yeah, I need to go just for an update or to keep myself healthy and a maintenance kind of thing," which I deeply believe that the majority of people at some point in their life would benefit tremendously from some sort of checkup, mentally and emotionally.
How often do you think someone should do that?
Well, when people come in with crisis, most of the time, weekly is what people are seeking because they're in an urgent situation.
Yeah.
But we don't necessarily, we push toward getting people where they don't need to come, as much, and that's the whole point.
Yeah.
But I have people that will come in monthly that aren't necessarily in a crisis, but certainly want to have an opportunity to sit down and to connect on that level with how they're feeling and how they're doing in their relationships and with themselves and with others. And so I have lots of monthly clients that had started out weekly and then just gradually began to feel better and their crisis began to calm.
Okay, all right.
And so they come monthly.
So do you have anybody who comes maybe once every 2 or 3 months, or is that?
Rarely. Because at that point I would say that people, first off, things change in 2 or 3 months dramatically. So, So, we tend to want to discharge then just because people also need to know that, that they can come back and kind of start again if they need to.
Sure.
But occasionally, and then it's interesting, I'll have people that'll be gone for 2 or 3 or 4 months and I'm thinking they're done, and then all of a sudden I'll get a call out of the blue. I need to come back. So, there's no prescription necessarily or a recipe for success. It's just everyone's different. And so when people come in, it's like a blank canvas. People often think that I have this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps, and it's not that at all. When I sit with people, they're the leader of that hour. That's their hour. So I follow their lead as far as what it is they need to talk about. And I believe deeply in the empowerment model, which is that I'm not the one that gives power to someone. It's that they have the power of God within themselves to be able to be well. It's sometimes for me, it's holding up a mirror for them, and also to help them through my reflection back to them from an objective standpoint to see things about themselves that they may not have been able to see otherwise, where they begin to say, "Oh yeah, I can do that," or I am capable in a way that I was not able to see that without a little clarity. So, yeah, that may be a little different than what some people might think therapy would be about.
So you must have to really cultivate an awareness and a readiness that you can bring to these sessions to make sure that you're really listening. You've got to be on. This has got to be draining.
Yes.
How do you do that?
You're right, and I try to, and probably our confession is that I probably see too many clients in any given week, but I try to cultivate good self-discipline, take care of myself as much as I can, body, mind. I go to therapy myself every other week at a minimum, just to kind of talk through what we call countertransference, which is the idea that when I sit with someone and what they're feeling and thinking, that it triggers emotions in me, which is normal for anyone, and you begin to explore what it is that's going on internally with you that you need to be aware of, so it doesn't become the elephant in the room and the problem then it becomes about the therapist and not about the client.
Right.
So through therapy, supervision, which is we meet Fridays with our staff and we review and download our stuff and help one another. And just through, I have a Monday morning prayer group of men that hold me accountable to disciplines. And I never work on weekends. That's just the rule. And so I do work some evenings, but I try to have 2 full days where I don't do any work related to this so that I can have at least that time for a break. And so those are some of the ways that I do that. Yeah.
So what, sorry, keep track of time. I guess I could do this. This is probably.
That's what I do all the time, just punch the button.
Put it.
Oh, you're going to do the clock then.
Well, it's not working, but. Okay, so what are some healthy mental health habits, besides going to counseling, that we should practice on a daily basis?
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead, sorry.
Well, I mean, obviously, every physician should tell you this, is that in addition to 20 to 30 minutes of exercise as much as possible in a week, not just for your physical wellness, but the body, when you're exercising, releases serotonin, which is the feel-good brain chemical. The same chemical that when you take a medication for depression or anxiety, it stimulates that flow of serotonin.
Wow.
So the more that you exercise, you're literally doing the natural way to feel good. So it's an emotional, mental health, wellness as well as physical when you exercise. So that's one thing, diet and exercise with that. And the other part, quite honestly, is meditation or prayer time where you begin to eliminate in our world of distractions and busyness and phones vibrating and pulsing on our leg. There's been studies that say every time the phone vibrates that it releases an adrenaline rush into our bodies that we're not aware of. So you imagine how many times in a day your phone vibrates and how many adrenaline pumps you get into your system without even knowing it.
Right.
So to try to have times each day where you turn off all of that and people and situations in order to deep breathing, in order to focus on God or on nature, whatever you need to do to take your blood pressure down. And it's not just about letting your mind go free. Sometimes it's about journaling. Sometimes it's about focusing on something. And you begin to kind of focus on an object and allow that communication to clear your mind. Because we live in a world of distraction and chaos all the time, messages sent to us. So I really highly recommend that for anyone. And at the very least, don't always have the radio on. Don't always have the computer and the cell phone on or the television. If it's just driving in your car with it quiet, something that you just focus on nothing else except the task at hand. I highly recommend that in our world.
That's great, man.
Yep.
Cool.
I'm an anxious person, and I know this from experience, and have struggled with depression in my life. So I have found that these practices have helped me tremendously. So it's certainly my own testimony about that as well.
So what, between blacks and ROs, which barbecue place do you prefer?
Listen, I was born. Listen, neither.
Okay.
I went to. Sorry, Gastonia people. Shelby was great. Bridges. Reed Bridges said, "You take care of me up there, I'll take care of you down here." And we would go for a free plate. But honestly, I was raised with Lexington barbecue, High Point area. So Stamey's and Kepley's in Greensboro and High Point. It beats all this Gastonia barbecue. Sorry, I can't.
That's all right,
I can't
man.
help it.
That's okay. That's good. So what TV show are you binge watching right now? Speaking of mental health.
Well, I will tell you this. My wife is a binge watcher, a Netflix binge watcher. My son got me on Parks and Rec.
Oh, cool.
But I don't do Netflix. I am a ESPN guy.
Oh, wow.
And I watch old time. But I will say, We installed an antenna, and on the Heroes channel, channel 46 at 8 o'clock, I watched the original Star Trek series, which I have been watching at 8 o'clock every weeknight on channel 46.
Nice.
So yeah, that's my show.
Captain
Yeah.
Kirk.
Yeah, Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock.
It is great. I mean, some of those episodes, the writing is like, I'm like, wow, they came up with that back then.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you think about all the equality and justice issues they tackle.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I never saw that as a kid.
Sure.
Some pretty bad acting, but it didn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's all nostalgia now.
Yeah.
So.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, if you had the choice, like President of the United States, you were voting, and you had the choice between David Christie and Justin Smith, who would you vote for?
I probably wouldn't vote because I love them both.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a trap.
It is. I'm sorry.
Do not trap me.
See, I asked some people that, and they're like, but like I figured, you tease David enough, maybe you guys.
How could you not vote for King
around.
David? But I just.
Well, no, I know. Well, and like I know after you guys came back from that chrysalis flight thing, you guys definitely like bonded.
Yeah, he harassed
That's
me.
okay for me to say that, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I'll tell you what he did. We turned off the lights. It's time to go to bed, and he's like calling my name and calling my phone from across the room, and I pounced on him. I did. He does not like to be tickled on his feet.
Okay.
He will wilt. So if you ever want to get after him, try to grab his feet.
It's good
He
information.
hates it.
It's good information. All right, well, Reverend Eddie Ingram, thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Doing this. I know it takes a lot of time, but I enjoyed it, and I think our viewers will as well.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Alrighty, thanks.
See you later.
Yes, sir. Take care.
You too.